Hi, I'm Diane, and this is Neil, and welcome to the Family Collective. Today we're going to talk about part one of a three-part series. That's an article that Neil has written on the Family Collective and on Medium, and it's a really important topic, and I kind of want him to introduce it.
Thank you, Dan. I think one of the things as we think about the theme of reopening following the COVID-19, we've talked a lot about during this isolation the importance of reconnecting with our family.
Yeah.
And as important a topic as that is, it isn't always easy because oftentimes there are scars, there are things that have happened in the past that have made it more difficult. And I think family is one of those fragile things that all of us wrestle with. We want it to work right, but at the same time, the people who know us best sometimes remember the things we've done wrong.
Yeah.
And so it's important to begin to talk about some ground rules to reopen your family. And so that's some of what Diane and I want to talk to you about in this multi-part series. So Diane's going to lead off with the first topic on vulnerability and communication. So Diane, will you take it?
Yeah. You know, there is a world-renowned speaker out there by the name of Brene Brown, and if you've never heard of her, you should look her up. But she kind of quotes that to believe that vulnerability is a weakness is to believe that relationship or communication is a weakness. And we really want to talk to you today about what it would mean to be more vulnerable in your relationships. So if you're afraid of showing weakness, if you're afraid of exposing yourself to others, you need to listen to a little bit of this today, because you may be freezing out the opportunity to love and to let your authentic self really shine. I mean, you today may be afraid of, showing who you are, but it's important that the people within your family get to really know you, get to really understand you, get to really know what you are like on the inside. I know that sounds silly. For a real life example of this is Neil and I. Many of you've heard, about what went on, several years ago in our marriage. But we had we call it colossal marriage mess. But I think a big part of that was what was happening underneath the current, that we really didn't relate to each other. I think we were really good business partners. What do you think? Yeah. And we didn't really have a place where we knew how to communicate with each other, that we knew how to really kind of deeper know each other's emotions. So I would ask you this: if you're willing to risk it today, are you afraid of exposing your parts or your personalities that you're afraid your family may not like? Do feelings of fear and shame stop you from sharing, those feelings? Here's some things that we can work on. How about ask for what you need? Yes. That may sound so simple, but how many of you out there really think that's hard? I mean, when we're hurting, it's really hard to ask for help. It's almost easier to go away and feel rejected. What would that look like to you?
I think oftentimes asking for what you need, oftentimes even as adults, we leave it behind the scenes or we leave it below the surface. So it's still a theme of the conversation, but we don't know how to say it out loud and directly. Yeah. And sometimes that takes the form of sarcasm. It did in my life. Or sometimes it takes the form of manipulation, where we're trying to get somebody to do something, but we're afraid to be direct and ask for it.
Yeah, that's right. And that goes hand in hand with the next thing. Be willing to share your feelings. It's again, harder to tell somebody exactly what I'm feeling versus what's wrong with them, what they're doing wrong, what they're not doing well in the relationship. So say what you want, that I think when we're talking about saying what you want, like we said, sometimes it's easy to get stuck in the tit, the tat, what's bad about you, what you're not doing. How about if you instead said, hey, when you do that, it makes me feel sad? Or what if I truly ask you for downtime because I'm feeling exhausted? Or what if I just need somebody to listen? I think I was afraid of doing that really early on. I don't think I even knew how to say, I need to be heard. What else do you think would be helpful?
I think oftentimes these conversations are ripe with emotion.
Yeah.
And so the stakes tend to always be on a hair trigger.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes they result in a blow up, and we need to slow down. Yeah. We need to be present. We need to not think we already know what the other family member's going to say, because oftentimes we have familiar scripts that we've lived with our whole life. And but I think it's important to practice it. The thing I would tell you is all of us fail at this.
Yeah.
And I think especially when you're starting out and trying to reconnect with people, it's important to say it's not always going to go right, but maybe you need a little cooling off or a timeout.
Yeah.
And then come back and say, how can we communicate through this better? I think I heard you saying this. Is that what you really meant in those circumstances?
Mm-hmm. That's good. I like that. And we just need to remember, as we're kind of closing up this time today, that vulnerability is a key ingredient in healthy relationships. It does not work well when we cannot actually open ourselves up to the other person.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I tell people, this may not have started in your marriage.
Right.
You may have come into this marriage not being able to do this very well. So as you're looking at doing it and trying and experimenting, follow a couple of things that we just talked about. Vulnerability, without it, relationships struggle.
Yeah.
And, my secrets, my fears, they get in the way of really knowing you and knowing who you are.
I think I'd challenge you guys out there that vulnerability, I think so often, or at least in my generation, was viewed as a weakness.
Yeah.
And so I think Brene very well says it's leaning into the discomfort.
Yeah.
The fact that it's hard for me to reach for another human being, especially for those hidden emotions or those needs that I'm very worried about expressing out loud. I think it's really important that we learn how to reach for that other person and realize the vulnerability doesn't make us weaker. It makes us stronger, and it makes us better connected.
Amen. And I think the last thing I kind of want to say with that is it's important to know that you're worth it. It's easier to be vulnerable when you believe that you are worthy of connection, when you know that, that it's not just up to you, that it's a part of who you are is just important to them. And it will make it easier to say, I miss you, I want you, I love you, I need this connection. So we want to finish up this section today, or this part one today, by saying, you may not always get what you want in your relationships, but you will do better if you're open emotionally with your spouse.
And I think the stakes will come down as you learn to navigate the emotional part of your relationship and realize that it's just as real as how's the weather. It's just as real as the other pieces. It may have detours one day to the next, but it's an important part of what makes us who we are.
Yeah,
So.
right. Well, thank you for being with us today, and we're going to go ahead and start on part 2, and we'll look to connect with you there.
Thank you.